Welcome to Wild and Exposed, your #1 adventure, nature, and outdoor photography podcast. Wild and Exposed is hosted by Michael Mauro, Ron Hayes, and Jason Loftus. Thanks for tuning in.
So we're back with Drew and Erin, and we did a little photo expedition like we told everybody we were going to do. And what we're going to do is highlight that expedition. Well, originally we intended to record it out in the field, but some dude forgot the recorder.
Nobody's pointing any fingers on
who forgot that.
Yeah. But actually, as it turns out, I'm glad we did because the wind picked up really bad, and these microphones are horrible in the wind. And then also, it gave us a chance to just shoot all day.
And focus on the bears.
Focus on the bears, and now we can recap the day. And I think it's important to recap the day because it just sets the scene, right? It just sets the scene for what needs to be protected.
If we were so focused on the bears, why were my photos so out of focus?
Well, I don't know. I got some great content, especially of the salmon. So
it was interesting, though, because we were talking about this earlier. And, you know, it's such an odd summer with COVID and travel restrictions and things like that. I did feel like I was out of practice.
Yeah.
And shooting anything, really.
Yeah, I haven't shot video in a month and a half.
That was probably good to do, though, right?
Yeah, no, it was really nice to do. It's always nice to get back there and watch the bears anyways. Like, you go out and you're like, oh, yeah, they're so silly. We had that one playing with the stick and rolling over. And
What's it like when you guys go out, when you don't see it, when it's been that long? Because this is totally unusual, right? What was your first impression when we first got there? Was it, I just can't wait to go see what this is going to be?
Well, I'd been getting some reports because there have been a few people trickling out there. And so, and we did have one member of our party, Max Block, who'd been out there giving us reports from the field.
And we grilled him because we wanted to know. We were all like super anxious. So we're like, Max, what about this? Max, did you see this?
Where are the bears?
Where are the bears? How many bears?
Which bear?
Can you describe the bears?
Well, and so I was anxious in a good way because since I've been doing this every year, I really enjoy catching up with familiar faces. And one of the things that I know, we saw a ton of family groups yesterday.
That was fun.
And there were a lot of them yearlings that I recognized from last year when they were Cubs of the Year. So just kind of checking in, making sure the family's still intact, or, you know, seeing a lot of them or if they were yearlings last year, now they're reaching that goofy, awkward teenage phase. And it's like to be able, I feel really lucky to be able to do this every year. And you do watch these bears grow up. And coming back every year, checking in on them, making sure you have bears drop out every year, and it doesn't mean they've died. They might just be using a different stream that year, but I was really impressed out there because there were a ton of fish. The fish had made it to places they hadn't made it in a decade, so the bears were spread out. But we were trying to do the math. How many bears did we end up seeing yesterday?
I think Max told us it was 38 bears.
38 bears.
Within
5 hours?
Or 6, 5 hours.
Yeah.
So I was trying to think of that as we were walking out yesterday when we first landed. Mm-hmm. And I guess we should just paint this whole picture, right? So we're taking off out of Homer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then we fly.
In a float plane.
To
really paint the picture.
Yeah.
A beautiful green float plane.
Yep.
Beluga Air. We flew with
and
Wes.
our majestic pilot got out of the plane and said, welcome. Come join me.
And they do have that prestige of being an Alaskan bush pilot, right? Mm-hmm. That's just like, that's got some stuff to it.
Well, and this was my first time to that part of Katmai. So that's always really exciting, too, when you're going to a new part of the park to see it.
Well, and I got to give Wes a shout out, too, because I've got a short list of pilots in Alaska with whom I will fly. You pick your pilots based on their self-preservation instinct. And I've been flying with Wes for a long time now, and I would fly anywhere with that guy. And basically because he's canceled so many times on me. If your pilot doesn't want to fly, you don't want to fly.
Exactly. We've had so many times at our family lodge where people will argue against it when the pilot says no, and it's like, no, listen to your pilot. They know what they're talking about. They want to fly you, but these 100-knot winds are not what you want to be in a bush plane. But we had beautiful weather. I mean,
Beautiful.
We showed up and it was stunning, and you're always excited when that happens because you're like, oh, it's going to be a good flight.
And it was flat the whole way. I mean, there wasn't
Perfect.
very few bumps at all.
Well, and so we took off from Homer, and so if you're picturing where Homer is, it's at the south end of the Alaska Peninsula. You get in this float plane. We were in a de Havilland Beaver. There were 4 of us and a little bit of gear. And so it's about an hour and 15-minute flight over to Katmai Park, and Katmai Park is 4 million acres, so it's twice the size of Yellowstone. Like when you're trying to put scale to all this, and Katmai Park has a bunch of different bear viewing opportunities within the park itself. So you've got the Katmai Coast, which you can camp there. You can do day trips. A lot of people do it by boat. Like if you you remember the podcast with Brad Josephs? He's been doing boat tours out there for, they're decades. He's been doing that now, and it's just a stunning place. But it's a completely different experience than if you were on so that's the Cook Inlet side or the Shelikof Strait side, and then you cross over the mountains, and in the rest of the park, you've got probably the most famous bear viewing spot in the whole world is Brooks Falls, and that's the Tom Mengelson, the catch, the salmon jumping into the bear's mouth. It's one of the busier bear viewing spots, but it's those Bristol Bay sockeye salmon going up, and they
and that district that feeds into that waterfall, the Naknek-Kwijak district, got 23.4 million sockeye in that run this year.
That's impressive.
Which was a good run.
That's a good run.
Better than normal.
That's better than normal. That's really good.
Yeah. And then, so Brooks, get people coming in on day trips. You can camp. You go through the falls is what everybody wants to see. But frankly, I like the rest of Brooks too. You've got different platforms, bridges you can check out, and it's an amazing experience. And then we were in a more remote corner of Katmai, and it's float plane in. So we fly across the inlet. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. The first part, you're flying out of Homer, you're waving at all your friends as you take off, and they're all jealous. And so the first part, you're over water, and that's not the most interesting. But then
we did see a whale with her calf. Yeah.
Yep. Whales and clouds, ocean.
A lot of water.
A lot of water.
You wear a life jacket while you're in the plane.
Just in case.
Just in case.
And then you fly by Augustine Volcano, which, you're flying by this volcano that goes off about every decade. It's a little overdue. It did not go off on our trip, which I crossed my fingers.
It is 2020.
It's 2020. What's next? Oh, volcano. Yeah, it's about
The last time I flew by there, it was smoking.
Ooh. Actually, in the Beluga Air office, they've got a picture of when it went off one of the times. That was on the cover of, I think, National Geographic. Like, ooh, yeah. So, yeah, we flew over, you fly over kind of by McNeil River, and then you go up through some passes, and boom, you're over on the Bristol Bay side of the mountains. And this is, of course, that huge, abundant sockeye run. We did the last podcast, and we talked a lot about the unique qualities of Bristol Bay. And this year in particular, Erin didn't catch all the fish.
I tried. Of course, letting the escapement through because I want a sustainable run. But I tried to outfish everyone.
But that meant there were a lot left for the bears.
Yeah, the bears were very happy if we go by salmon.
And the landscape is so different out there because it's these big rivers, lots of water. It's all tundra. We didn't see a tree all day. Is there a tree? There are alders and willows.
Yeah, alders and willows, but no.
There's no spruce trees or deciduous trees or anything
Not
like that.
the area that we're in, no.
And it's wide open. Just kind of like rolling hill kind of stuff, but mountains in the distance that surround the whole place.
It's so cool because when you have a different habitat like that, the social dynamics in those areas are going to be different, and the food resources are different, and the availability on the water is different, where they can stand. And then you have someone like Drew on the trip who's been watching bears forever and knows the bears. Suddenly you have all these new stories coming that you didn't even know. You're getting the bear's history. You're learning about, she's a really good mom. She's really successful with cubs. Here's this. It's really cool to be with someone who knows the area so intimately because suddenly, it's like a drama unfolding.
Well, we were sitting there on the river, and there's some fishermen that go by every now and then, and Drew was talking to one of the fishing guides, and they talked about a bear, and you're like, oh, yeah, the one that looks like it gets his nails done every week.
The glamorous bear.
Frosted ears or frosted hair. And you can reference those bears, which is really cool. It's super awesome to be able to, like you just said, to go out with Drew.
Well, and what else is cool about that spot and other spots is, I worked for a number of years over on the Cook Inlet side. So I worked at McNeil River State Game Sanctuary for 6 years. I did a number of years of boat tours and day trips over on the Katmai coast. But there are definitely several bears that we see over on the Bristol Bay side that you recognize from the Cook Inlet side. Like these bears have come, we measured on Google Earth a few days ago, and it's 25 miles straight line. So they probably didn't walk in a straight line. They probably took a little meander. 25 miles across a mountain range from McNeil River to Katmai where we were. And so, these bears, they took advantage of the sedge and some early runs of fish over on the Cook Inlet side. And then they'll cross mountains, everything to get to this Bristol Bay fishery. And the fact that you can even track these huge animals over space and time like that it's kind of mind-blowing to me. Like Alaska's a big state, but it's really like a small town. Even with people in bears, you're in Fairbanks, you run into somebody from Anchorage. You're in Kaktovik, you run into somebody from Juneau.
When if you meet someone, you know at least 3 people who know them. Especially when you go to Homer.
You're in Katmai, you run into a bear from McNeil River. Like it holds for people and bears, really.
Yeah.
Well, and as we're flying in, you can see how many of those sites you could see McNeil off, or not see it, but the general direction. You can see all these different little spots along the way where there's actual bear viewing that can go on, right? So it just speaks to the proximity.
Well, and then you start getting these river systems in view, and you start to be able to count the bears as you're flying in, and I think it just gets more and more exciting as you go, because it's a beautiful landscape. It's stunning. There's bears everywhere, and you're watching them, and you're like, oh, I get to go there, and then you land on this little lake, and you get ready to hike.
And that's where started this whole conversation, is you were saying how many bears, or we were talking about how many bears we saw. So in the first 20 minutes, you land on a lake that is probably, half a mile from the river?
Yeah, it's not that far.
It's not that far.
And then you have to make it past all the blueberries.
Right.
Which
was
can be
hard.
distracting.
Yeah.
Yep. And you get to this first bluff, and from that point, and this is where about 20 minutes into our walk, I quit just counting because I knew we were going to see tons of bears. But we saw 12 bears just in that time.
Just like that, yeah.
In 20
It's
minutes.
so fast.
Yeah.
And then, you can't even count how many salmon you're seeing, and it's really cool because the water's low, and the salmon are bright red at this point, the sockeye, because they get that bright red body color and the bright green heads. And they just, the river has dark patches everywhere where the fish are.
Yeah. And, it should be this whole, like we're talking about Katmai, which is so big. We should mention that, this whole north end of the Alaska Peninsula is the best bear habitat in the world, but it's part due to these large complexes of protected land. And so you have, we're in Katmai for this mission, but there's also Lake Clarke National Park up to the north, which I know, Michael, you've spent time in Lake Clarke, and Jason's been there, goes there regularly.
Right.
And, that's another amazing place to watch bears. And the more places you go, like we mentioned all the ones scratch the surface on Katmai, but then you throw in Lake Clarke and Redoubt Bay and Redoubt Mountain Lodge and all these different places, like you can have just such a variety of experiences. Like you go bear viewing all summer and not have the same
I think that's what
experience
Max did,
twice.
isn't he?
That is what Max did this summer.
Max is racking in the bears.
Max Block has had an epic summer of
We're
bear
all
viewing.
jealous of Max
So
Block.
we've talked about Max quite a bit. Can you give us a snapshot of what Max is doing for you guys?
He's awesome.
So Max was on our mission, and he had the unique opportunity this year in that he came up to Alaska super early and did his 2-week quarantine.
his
So
test.
that makes him an honorary Alaskan. And so he was able to go on some of these missions where he was lucky enough to get a McNeil River permit for over 4th of July. I think he flew out there on 4th of July weekend and was there for 4 days and nailed it.
Well,
I
and
think.
do you want to quickly say how do you get a McNeil River permit? Because
Oh.
people might not know how
So it's a
hard
very
that is to get.
it's kind of the crown jewel of bear viewing. McNeil River is the largest congregation of brown bears anywhere on Earth, and so I think Max said the most he saw at McNeil this year at one time was 39 bears in a quarter-mile stretch of river. And so you're out there for 4 days. You've got this permit that you've won through a lottery that you apply on the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's website.
Like a year in advance, right?
I think
At least
you can
6
already
months, I
you
think.
can already
6
apply
months.
for
Yeah.
next year. I'm pretty sure.
Suddenly it's going to flood with applications.
We're just making the
There's
odds
no
bad for everybody else.
application.
And you go out, you camp out, and it's 10 people at a time. There's a fish and game staff who will take 10 people a day into the sanctuary. This year their numbers were a little lower people-wise just because, everything that's going on. And so Max was able to go in, spend 4 days camping out, seeing all these bears, and then stuck around and has been to Katmai several times. And he was one of the first ones this year that we've always known the bears are going back and forth, but there was a really distinct bear that he was able to get images of 25 miles apart. So he saw it over the 4th of July at McNeil, and then he saw him last week in Katmai. And so and this is a real distinct bear. Bears can be hard to tell apart. On some level, they're all brown and hairy, but this one has a really distinct snaggletooth. And he's a huge blonde male, which also makes him unique. So Max said he picked him out from a mile away and said, that's him. And sure enough, you look at the pictures, same bear, 2 different places.
And Max has been taking photos of every bear he's seen, and he's able to ID them then in collaboration, right? Isn't this a
yeah.
collaboration?
So Max was with us on our mission, and his job was to take pictures of every single bear that we saw, and then at the end of the season, we're going to have him submit all those pictures to Alaska Department of Fish and Game, so one of the technicians can go through and try to match up and see how much overlap there is between these 2 bear viewing sites. So it's kind of a citizen science.
Not a bad one to do.
Right?
Well, and that's totally verifiable, right? Because you can verify and know for a fact, based off of the information that he's got, of seeing it at Katmai, seeing it at McNeil.
And I think if you've worked and photographed bears enough, you can tell bears apart, even if it's hard.
Well, I was going to say that because you said it's hard to identify bears for the general viewer. But you've spent enough time around these bears where you're like, oh, that's what. So, you tend to nickname these bears with certain nicknames, right? And I don't remember. You were talking about a couple yesterday. I don't remember their names, but.
Who are we talking? Dusty was the one that.
Dusty's the
Max said.
snaggletooth.
He's the snaggletooth. Yeah.
Which that is by far and away the best bear to have appear in both places because there's no question that
which
is
bear
not
it is.
the same bear.
Because usually males are pretty dark, aren't they, too? That's
Yeah,
you were
right up
saying
until
the
they're
blonde.
not.
The blonde is unique.
Yeah, there are more dark males, or males tend to be darker, but that's not a hard and fast rule.
No,
don't just assume.
Don't do it
yeah.
that. But you usually don't get blonde bears with snaggletooth.
Well, he's got a snaggletooth. He's got one of the claws. I think it's the outer claw on his right front paw is broken in a very distinct way. So really, I mean, if you're putting them through a binomial key, you say, is it a male? Is it a female? Yes, yeah, you go over here. And then you say, well, is it brown or blonde? Oh, it's blonde, so it's one of these. And then does it have all its claws? And you could key them out, essentially. And that's
with scars, ear styles. Some of them will have frostbite on their ear or something, and it's half of an ear.
I think that's why, too, I would always recommend going with an experienced guide. Even if you think you know how to act in bear country, which you might, having an experienced guide who's been in the field for year after year and gets to know these bears, you're going to have a whole different experience if you're with that guide and hearing these stories. I think it brings so much to the experience if you're able to be with someone who knows the bears.
I agree 100%.
And it lessens the impact on the bears, too. If you have a bear that you'll know right away, you're like, oh, that's so-and-so. They don't necessarily like having us around. You just go find a different bear. Let that bear be. There's no reason to force photographic notoriety on a bear because it just might not.
Well, and not only that, but when you have your head and eyes to the camera, you're not paying attention to what's going on behind you. So when people ask me about photographing bears or filming bears in Alaska, I always recommend taking a guide with you, even if you're experienced. Just because, I mean, it brings more to the experience. You have that safety option. You don't have to pay attention quite as much. You're able to focus on your photographing. Like, I just really think that, and then you're also helping an industry that's helping protect the habitat.
That's well put. And I agree with you 100%. Anytime I've done a bear trip in Alaska, I've always went with a guide.
Well, you've gone with some of the classics.
You
got to go out with Derek Stoddard.
Right. Yeah, some of the best guides for sure. And I they're worth their weight in gold.
Yeah.
And they know these. It's just exactly what you said. They know the bears. They know what the habits are. That's another thing you referenced yesterday was, since you hadn't been there all summer, you really don't know the little hidey holes that this bear likes or the little fishing spot that this particular bear likes. So having that knowledge as a photographer, you're way more productive.
It's great.
Way more productive.
And not that we weren't productive yesterday.
I mean, we were extremely productive yesterday. But also, you've had years of experience, so even if you've missed a couple months.
Well, can you imagine if you and I were out there and because Drew took us right to the little spot where you drop off the bluff.
You and I would be wandering around all over the place.
We'd have stopped with the first bear. We'd have probably stayed there all day just because we found a bear, right?
Well, wouldn't have made it past the blueberries.
Well, no, we wouldn't have. I would have been eating there. And it's funny because I have heard people before be like, well, I don't want a bear guide. Like, I'd rather, save money and then I don't need anyone helping me. And I'm like, you don't understand what you're missing out on. Like, you should be so excited about having someone with so much knowledge and so much experience. And again, the stories.
Yep.
Like, you're learning a story about every single bear. And you're going to get better photographs because of it.
Always. Always. So now let's take it from... We've made it 20 minutes in.
We've passed the blueberries.
We passed the blueberries. We've seen 12 bears. Now let's take everybody through the rest of the day because I had no idea. What was funny is the lake we landed on was the same lake that I landed on the first time I was at this spot. I had no idea. When you said, hey, let's go to Katmai, I was like, okay, great. I had no idea where we were going.
You to Katmai.
Right? Right. So I'm like, okay, let's go. I didn't know we were actually going to land in the same exact spot. But from that lake, then we walked. We did it differently when I was there with Derek. So you took us to the first spot where we dropped off the river, and let's just take it from there and kind of what we saw.
Well, so we dropped down into the river, and there are, bears and fish, because there are willows and alders. Well, it's all willows out there, and you break on through, and suddenly you got to take stock of where the bears are. And so there are bushes they could be behind. And so you kind of just slow your roll a minute, take stock, say, okay, we've got bears over here, we've got here. And then we really picked a spot and just committed to it. Said, okay. Because what happens is these bears are on kind of a rotation. And so the salmon will pool up and the bear will come belly flop in the middle of it. The salmon will disperse. Well, then the bear will go to a different spot and belly flop, and the salmon will disperse, then go to a different spot, and while it's moving, that first spot will reset, and the salmon will come back in. So they end up doing loops. And so one of the traps that's easy to fall into is saying, oh, there are more bears up there. Let's go up there. Well, as soon as you get up there, all those bears that are up there are going to go right down to where you just were. So it's important to be patient, pick a spot, commit to it. Like pick the shot based on what you want the behavior to be, the backdrop to be. Like really compose the shot so that when a bear shows up, you're ready for it. Like you put the bear right where you want it to be.
You have that picture in your head.
Yeah.
It also helps me because it takes me a while to set up the video gear. And if we're like, let's move, I'm like, oh man.
So let's actually start right there. There's two things. So we were actually there. I don't remember if we said this in the other podcast. Did we say exactly why we were going? Because you guys were working on a project.
Yes.
And you needed this fish or bear with fish footage, right?
Yes.
And then, so that was the reason we're there. I can't remember if we talked about that exactly or not.
That was so long ago.
It was a very long time ago.
And then the second thing is when you're talking about the behavior or whatever, you kind of knew the shot, or both of you, I don't know if you guys had talked about it, but you wanted a bear coming directly at the camera with fish in between us, between the photographer or the camera and the bear, and you just get this head-on, just rushing at the fish shot,
Yeah,
right?
because if you put yourself in the wrong spot, suddenly you have a bear bum facing you the entire time, which, beautiful, great, but not exactly the shot that we want.
Well,
And then we got lucky because we had so many family groups that came in. And it's cool, too, because the spot we were in, the water level was different depending on which direction you looked. And bears use a variety of techniques to fish. So we had snorkelers on one side, belly floppers in another place, and then the ones that actually knew what they were doing and were far more efficient that were getting the fish in the shallow area. So we had a mixture of fishing techniques and different bears.
Well, and then going back to the reason why we were doing this is because we are eyeball deep right now in the fight against the proposed Pebble mine, which we talked about a lot in the last podcast. And it's, this fight's been going on a long time now, and a lot of you have probably submitted comments. You've probably written your legislators. You've taken action, but all of that is leading up to now. This fight is coming to a head in the next month. Like we are in it. Things are happening. I mean, my head is every day I wake up and I check what's going on today, and we change our social media message. We change the
links.
call to action. Oh, I got to change all the links on the website because this happened, and you have to react. I mean, it feels like a war.
And then I have Drew on speed dial, and I'm like, "Did you see what happened today?" Drew's like, "Hello, Aaron."
Well, we just had this big thing the other day because we've had our campaign planned out. We're going to talk about how the famous bears of the Alaska Peninsula, would be impacted negatively by this proposal. And then the other day, Donald Trump Jr. tweets out his opposition to the Pebble project, and so suddenly we're scrambling like, oh wow, like
this is not what we expected to happen.
We did not expect that to happen. And so, like today I tweeted.
You never tweeted before.
Never tweeted before.
I would like everyone to know what a big deal this is for Drew to have tweeted. So if you get a chance, tell Drew congratulations on your first tweet.
Yeah,
well,
and keep it up.
Well, and so my first tweet, what I had to do, because I'm more Instagram, so I took a screenshot of my tweet to put on Instagram, because I think that's how you do it,
I think
right?
that's how you do it. I don't know. I'm probably as tweet inefficient as you.
So this was, I don't know how Twitter works necessarily, but my tweet was, I went on Donald Trump Jr.'s Twitter, and I retweeted his tweet to Ivanka Trump. Like I'm trying to insert myself into the family dynamics. And so
just adding some fuel to
because he's saying it, I'm like, well,
Ivanka,
hey Ivanka,
you look like you might like bears.
You might like bears, Ivanka. What do you? So everybody should go on to Twitter and retweet Donald Trump Jr.'s tweet at his sister.
I really like this plan.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, and obviously tweets are taken in high regard out there in D.C., so
Yeah.
the more you do, the better.
I'm glad it's not TikTok, because trying to imagine the two of us trying to figure out TikTok is just a disaster in itself.
Oh. We'll leave the TikTok to Brad Josephs.
Yeah, we'll leave it to him.
All right.
So
where were we?
That was our big news. So and then now another thing we want people to do. Should we go straight into that?
Yeah, so we do have this window, and where we are directing comments to specific Alaska senators, specifically Dan Sullivan, who is up for re-election, and we really want him to know that 62% of Alaskans are opposed to this project. Like, these are Alaskans who are going to be going to the polls, and not just Alaskans, that people who are outside Alaska who value the things Alaska has to offer, the people who are coming here to spend their tourist dollars. You might not be coming this year, you might not be coming next year, but sometime you want to make sure that there is this bear resource for you to come and experience, or your grandkids even.
Well, and if you're an American, I mean, these are national parks that we're looking at. This is public land. Like, as an American, there is some ownership to public lands and how proud we should be of our national parks and
I was
what they
going to say,
represent.
even if you're never going to show up here, you still probably would love to know that, hey, there's a wild place in this world that is wild.
Well, and when you make a comment, you're contributing. You're helping protect it.
Well, and there's a certain, I don't know, before I started contacting my legislators on a regular basis, I was nervous about it. I was like, oh, it's a big fancy, important person.
A big shot.
A big shot, yeah. But keep in mind, their job is to represent you. And they're not sitting there in Washington, D.C. with ESP. They don't know what you're thinking until you tell them. So it's a matter of, that is your right to talk to your representatives and say, look, I really don't like all this shady stuff that's going on with Pebble disregarding science. Or I don't like how this process has been rushed. Or there's a pandemic going on. That copper's not going anywhere. Why are you doing this during a pandemic? Like, there are any number of reasons.
Or it's an
Especially-
international company that's
yeah.
going to come in. It's not even an American company.
Yeah, that's another really good point to point out.
Yeah, and so they don't know until you tell them. And so we do have the alaskabears.earth website. So it's www.alaskabears.earth. We've got the alaskabears.earth on Instagram, where we will have, and I said these change frequently, so
Stay
we
up
will
to
have
date.
the most up-to-date links, actions you can take. And it really does seem like there's a different action every week because we are fighting an international mining company that is very adept at political gamesmanship. So suddenly something will happen over here, and we need to write to this legislator, or the draft or the final environmental impact statement came out, so we need to write to the EPA. So there are all these people. It's not a one and done. Like this is a strategic.
This is the
This
long
is a
haul.
marathon, not
Yeah.
a sprint.
Right.
And I didn't realize that before this all started. You know, I was always of the, we'll sign a petition and it'll go away or whatever. But no, like behind the scenes, there is so much going on.
The first time we fought this fight,
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing was going on. It was different people.
Yep, different
But
people.
somebody
same.
was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Yep. 20 years.
And there's been multiple partnership mining companies that have dropped out too. That's another thing to be aware of. They've said that it isn't worth the risk. So even mining companies have stepped away.
That's a direct quote from Rio Tinto.
I've been reading too much about Pebble, clearly.
No, Rio Tinto, one of the biggest mining companies in the world, walked away from this project because they said in their release that it was too risky. They didn't categorize that risk. They didn't say if it was financial risk or environmental risk, but it was probably a combination of all those things. Environmental risk does lead to economic risk. It was too risky for an established mining company like Rio Tinto, and so they just walked away. Anglo American walked away from like $400 million that they had already invested in this project. Again, too risky. So to have this going through with this junior mining company that's not even from the United States is like it's kind of insulting.
It just
Really.
doesn't make sense, too. We've all talked about this. It's like every time something new comes out, we're just like, this. It just doesn't make sense to take these risks. And big companies are seeing that. It doesn't make sense.
So let's circle back because I want to go back to the rest of the trip because
That's
a lot
why
of these
people are listening.
photographers, yeah, I think people want to know how to do this, whether you
Yeah.
can ever do it or not. You mentioned something earlier, Erin, where people just love to plan trips.
I love looking at different options that you have. There's something really exciting about like dreaming of your next big trip.
Right. It's an adventure, and you're planning that adventure.
I mean,
It's-
this could
it's
be your
kinda cool.
honeymoon for people.
But before we do that, the other thing I wanted to point out, and it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, I don't think we talked to anybody yesterday. Because everybody asks you, when you roll into town and you got a bunch of cameras, people are like, what are you doing? Well, we would say, we're going to go shoot some stuff on this campaign against the Pebble mine. And they're like, oh, yeah, I hate that project. We didn't talk to anybody yesterday that said, I don't really care, or, I'm all for it. So you said, 62% of Alaskans are against it.
You can pretty openly talk about how much you dislike the Pebble mine in Alaska and not get any pushback.
Not at all.
That is not a topic I shy away from.
And I want people to know that. I mean, because it really directly affects Alaskans, but it affects everybody because it is a national park.
Yep.
So just keep that in mind. When if you're like on the fence whether I don't have 10 minutes to go fill out the form, just take that 10 minutes.
And then the other thing, too, is it wasn't just bear viewers we saw. We saw fishermen out fly fishing on the river. So there's two different groups that are sharing this river with the bears, and both are having different experiences, but really probably life-changing experiences.
And it wasn't even all photographers. I mean, there were people that were just walking.
Oh, there was one lady who was a birder.
She was
There
definitely a
was,
birder.
definitely. There was those people that were sitting up on the hill that looked like they were laying in the sun in bear country.
Sunbathers.
And then that group that came through that is there like 10 people? It was a guide that you knew.
Oh yeah,
None of those people were serious photographers. No. They were just there to experience the experience.
And it is an experience.
It is.
And for those, keeping in mind, people are having their own experience out there. To a person, I don't know anybody that has gone bear viewing that didn't have it be a life-changing experience. Whether it's they got this fabulous story to go home and tell their friends, or just truly people who have transformed their lifestyles even to, these are the hardcore bear junkies. Really. These are the people that you see year after year. You run into them in Churchill. You run into them at, there was a woman I met in Churchill, and then just, said, oh, hi. Or no. It's the other way around. I met her at Brooks Camp. And then the next place I saw her was in Churchill, and you're just like, oh, I know you.
You're a bear junkie.
And she was retired. She was probably 70, 80 years old, and she was in her retirement, and what she did was go places and watch bears.
And there's a lot of people that do that. And the people that can't do that, they admire the pictures on Instagram.
Well,
and
Explorer.org has the live bear cams where they can enjoy these bears live, and many people do.
Daily.
Yeah, because it's really accessible. You can see the bears. People know every single bear at the falls. They know their names. There's fan pages on Facebook like
Fat Bear Week,
the competition we talked about. I mean, there's all this stuff. And, I mean, if you do get the chance to go, like seeing a brown bear for the first time in person is quite an experience.
Well, I got a comment. I put up one of my pictures from yesterday on Instagram. And the guy made a comment. He's like, I would crap my drawers if there was a bear that close to me. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, there's places where you should crap your drawers because you just don't have any business being that close to a bear. But there's also these places like Katmai, like Lake Clarke, like McNeil, where there's a symbiotic relationship where danger is not a part of the equation. I mean, we didn't even have a
cautious.
gun. Yeah, you're obviously
always cautious. You have your bear sprays. That's why you have your guides. But there is such a difference between Alaska Peninsula brown bears and, say, something a bear in Yellowstone, or even a bear in Anchorage, because there's this symbiotic relationship because of benign
repeated benign interaction, habituation.
Yeah. So there's a massive difference, and it's really important to understand this if you want to photograph bears or even go bear viewing. Every population of bears is a different population, and it's good to know how this population is going to interact with people. And in these areas, you stay your 50 yards away, like the park says. Sometimes a bear will approach, and if you have an experienced guide, they know how to handle that situation. Oftentimes, it's just to let it walk right by, and they don't even really care that you're there. But the amazing part of this area is because of these relationships, the photos you can get are amazing.
And this is really the only place you can do. If you go through my Instagram feed, it's just bear, tiger.
Cat.
Bear.
Butterfly.
And so I'm pretty up on the bear photos of the world. And, they all have their charms. Like, I love going to Grand Teton and photographing bears down there.
It's a different experience.
But it's a different experience. You get different expectations. And, they're all great. Wherever you go, it's going to be different. But the place where you can do this is the Alaska Peninsula.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and I guess speaking to proximity to bears, I mean, we had 38 bears, which we talked about already. There was only one bear all day that actually, it was that little young bear when we were leaving. Remember? And you were like, I'm surprised that little guy even just gave us a second look.
When it wasn't even like it's just kind of like a woo-hoo-hoo, I see you.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't even like.
No, and it wasn't a serious thing, but Drew was just like, I can't even believe that.
It was the only one that even gave us their attention whatsoever.
Yeah. And then all you did is, I don't even remember what you said. Hey, bear.
He said, hey there.
Hey, buddy. Keep it moving.
And it just turned and went away. But the experience and what you can do in places like this is amazing.
And Drew was talking about when you know the area, you understand each bear's boundaries. So you understand when you should leave a situation or when you just sit still and let the bear go by. Like, there's a lot of bear behavior and body language And it's a pretty amazing experience.
So in that one, that was a sub-adult bear. So that was probably like a 3.5-year-old bear. And we knew he was there because he was on a channel in the river that was not the channel we were in. He was the next one over. And we'd been standing there photographing salmon for, a half hour probably.
Can we talk about that? This is a photography podcast.
Yeah, I'm giving you some very inside information about my filming.
Yeah.
You should feel really lucky.
I think you should. Yeah, I think you should share.
I really appreciate the look Drew gave me when I was making this contraption. Basically, we had GoPros, and Drew and Mike were attaching them to rocks and setting them at the bottom of the riverbeds. And I was like, it'd be better a dynamic shot. So I got a stick, and I zip tied my GoPro to the stick, and I floated it down the river. So we have this very... If you're ever wondering what it's like to be a stick flowing through the river, I've got the video for you.
It's not just that she's a poor snorkeler. It was actually, it was a remote cam.
It is a rope. That's not me running my head into rocks.
And you didn't have a remote control to direct the stick?
Nope. No, unfortunately, that stick is a little bit low tech.
All you had was me on the other side hoping that it didn't get past me and we'd lose it forever.
It would be interesting to one day find that stick, someone finds it and it's like, what is this?
What is this? And what kind of footage do we have here? How long did that hour run for?
Yeah.
So, but Diane, we interrupted your story.
Oh, well, so I was talking about that little bear, and he had found a spot. It was obviously a crowded day on the river, and so bears like that are low ranking, for them to get a spot to themselves is pretty. He was probably pretty stoked.
He's proud of himself.
He was proud of
He's
himself.
Like, I
he
did
was
this
over there.
today.
Yeah, he was pounding the reds, and he comes out and he's got a little swagger. He's, on his own. His first summer, he's catching fish, and then all of a sudden he runs into us, and it was almost like he was just trying to be in charge of something.
Just imagine like a high school teenage boy, but then in a bear form.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so he was like, I'm gonna go. It wasn't a challenge, but he was like, It was a little swagger he had towards us.
That's exactly what it was, swagger.
Keep it moving, Bob. Keep it moving.
All right, so let's paint the picture of, I guess we can start. Well, everybody knows you hop on a float plane in Homer. You fly to Katmai.
You can also go out of King Salmon in Bristol Bay. That's another way to get there.
Yeah, so there's many ways to do that, but those are two of the most common ones.
Yeah.
Okay, so then take us from after we landed, we started walking. I just want people to know what to expect because we were there, 5 hours?
Yep. We were there a little longer than a normal trip just because we were on this specific mission. And so we ended up, you're walking over tundra, we're in waders, or some of us were in hip boots, some of us were in chest waders. And so we're walking in the stream, we're crossing rivers, we're watching out in the slippery spots. It is very low water this year, so we didn't have any restrictions. On a normal water year, you do follow a more regular route. Like I really felt like yesterday, because it was so low, we could have walked anywhere in the river. Mm-hmm. But on a high water year, you got to have a guide to know where to cross the river safely. And
what do you do on a high water? I'm totally leaving the script. What do you do? So the time I did it before, we just flew in and out of the same lake. And I guess we haven't got to that part of the story. Okay, wait. Go ahead.
Well, so usually on a day trip like that, we will walk between 3.5 and 5 miles. And so it's not like it's a forced death march for 5 miles. You're moving over here, and then you walk a half mile, and you're there.
Well, and you're so distracted by the fact that you have all these bears around you, and if you're a photographer, it's heaven for you. So.
And I don't know that we were ever in a spot where we didn't see at least a bear, right? I mean, maybe there was a couple parts.
there was tundra with bears far away. There was always a bear, I think.
Yeah, there was always a bear in view. Yeah. And what's interesting about that place is if you went there on approximately July 21st this year, there would have been no bears. The fish hadn't made it there. Those fish have to come all the way up from Bristol Bay through the lake system, then through Kukaklik Lake, and then up another creek, and then so if you'd gone from before, there would have been nothing. And then all of a sudden, the bears know, because they've got these different routes that they take every year. They're coming from the Cook Inlet side. They're coming from other places in Bristol Bay to that spot specifically for these fish. And they're all coming from far and wide. And one of the things that's going to mess that up or mess this system up is Pebble wants to put all this infrastructure out there. They want to put roads. They want to, well, besides the mine threatening the fishery itself, the actual food for the bears, you're going to have people and roads and power and plants and all these things that are going to serve to fragment the best bear habitat in the world. And habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, people coming in.
Increased interaction with people who aren't there to see bears or to be fishing, or that makes a big difference.
So if that same bear that walked by us, because we're well-behaved humans, if it walked up to the mine site or if it walked up to the port facility, they'd be shooting cracker shells at it. They'd be chasing it with trucks. They'd be hazing it. So they are fundamentally changing how that bear relates to humans. And it's a major concern of mine. And then we talked about this last episode too. The big fear is food conditioning. You look at other industrial sites in Alaska, like the North Slope, where they've got oil development. You know, all the bears that have been killed up there have been because they were food conditioned. And it really, it's a mantra. You read it on brochures. A fed bear is a dead bear is very true.
It's so true.
And if you start introducing people and food and infrastructure, anywhere there's conflict between bears and humans, the bears are going to lose in that bigger.
Well, that is one situation. And the other situation is if you get a bear that just understands that humans aren't cool, and they're down there fishing when there was a bunch of photographers, it could become that problem bear for a photographer.
Yep.
So that, which still ends up as a dead bear, right?
Yep.
But it also could be way different for a photographer. You wouldn't have the experience we had yesterday.
No, it absolutely would change the experience.
Yeah.
Well, and you tell your friends, oh, I came to Alaska and we saw bears. You show them their picture or the pictures, and they say, oh, you're nuts. But
does anyone ever tell you that?
oh, I get it all the time.
Every day.
And it's not. I should say, I'm not the only one that does this. There are approximately 500 jobs a year generated by the bear viewing industry. I'm not some
Also,
weirdo.
all the film crews. You see those popular
Film
films,
crews.
Disney Nature. You see a film about bears, Alaska bears. It's probably filmed there.
Yep. And there have been more people killed by rivers in Katmai Park than there have been people killed by bears. And there have been 2 people killed by bears in Katmai Park, and you can probably name one of them.
For sure.
Timothy Treadwell.
Yes, you got it.
And I would like to point out, this is something that people always talk to me about Timothy when they're like, oh, you're going to go film bears. Do you hear about the grizzly man? And I'm like, you do have to realize, like, he was in the field for a really long time, and those bears tolerated his behavior for a very long time.
Well, and the other thing was, he was in the summertime with all those bears. These were different bears. These weren't the bears that were there in the summertime. The bears that got him, he was there in October.
Which is, yeah.
It's a completely different bunch of bears.
Whole different bunch of bears, whole different mentality that they have at that point.
They're probably not a habituated bear because they're using that area at a different time when people aren't there.
They're not focusing on the salmon resource for food.
Well, and it should be said as well that he went 12 years going out of his way to do just about everything wrong.
Yep.
And so we're talking about, the experience of him dying, but, he set up his camp on a bear trail.
Yep.
In
no bear fences.
3 easy steps that are outlined in the Fish and Game How to Staying Safe in Bear Country brochure would have saved his life.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and I think that it is important to remember that, because you don't want that to be the reputation of those bears in that park, because if you safely interact, if you do it, it can be a really enjoyable, not scary experience.
So when you're thinking about an industry like Brooks Falls, on their busiest day, I think they ran 400 people. So you take, and all these other places, however many, I don't have any of the user data in front of me, but however many positive bear viewing experiences there are every day in the summer in Alaska, and then somebody says, hey, have you heard of Timothy Treadwell? This is one incident that happened 20 years ago, or I
don't remember how long ago.
Long
I think
time
it was
ago.
over 20
10
years.
to 20 years or
Yeah.
something.
And so
remember.
those incidents just capture our imagination that we're still talking about that one time that it happened 20 years ago. And he definitely was not on a guided bear viewing trip.
No,
No.
and that was on TV too, right? I don't think if he wasn't on TV, you probably wouldn't even know about it.
No.
Yeah.
I
You
don't
know,
think-
he had that Grizzly Man show, which Discovery did. So,
Yeah.
so take us to the last part of the trip because we saw bears the whole time.
Ooh, we have to add in. So we were sitting in our spot that we had picked, and we at one point had 4 different family groups around us fishing. So you're sitting there, and you have all these moms with their cubs, and you're watching each one try to fish. And one mom's fishing, and the cub's jumping on a branch. Another mom's fishing, and the cub's trying to fish next to it and failing miserably. Another mom's fishing with her 2 beautiful little cubs, and they're successfully catching their own fish and running, and then there's one trying to steal its mom's fish. Like, there's all around you. It's like a sensory overload. You have all these different things happening, and you have all these different moms acting in completely different ways. And so in one spot, we could have gotten a million different photo opportunities. And we were talking about it. There's 4 of us out there. All of our photos look very different, and they're the same bears, and they're the same time. So it's incredible.
And what Aaron's talking about is not over the course of an hour. This was one time during the day. We had at least 4 moms with cubs that we could see.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were all photographable.
Yeah.
Like, you had your choice between 4 family groups.
One had 2 of them had 1 each, and then one had 3.
Yeah.
And I was literally on a swivel, like, whoa, who's catching what?
And it was interesting because we had, different technologies. Each of us had different setups. Like, I had the Olympus OMD X with a 600 millimeter equivalent lens. Max had the 5D Mark IV with the 1
Brand
to
new
400. Yeah. And then, I'll let you guys talk about what you toted in the field that day.
I brought stills, so I shot with my 2 to 4 and 1DX, and then I brought the R5 just as a trial. It was super fun to carry. I'm not that happy with it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to give away.
But it was the first try.
Yeah, and I'm not giving it enough time. I needed to shoot a little bit more. But if I did it again, I would definitely take the red. And then Aaron, what
And
were
I
you
was
shooting?
shooting with a red Epic W with a 150 to 600 lens.
And she was killing it.
You haven't seen the footage.
Oh, I'm sure you could.
But
we had some really cute, beautiful moments, like when we had this it's one of the prettiest mom and cubs I've seen in a long time. She was a really dark brown bear, and she had her 2. They had just been fishing, and she laid down on the bank, and one put its paws around her bum and its head on her bum, and the other had its little head peeking over on her back, and it was just like picture perfect moment. And all of us were like just like filming and taking photos, and you're like, it's just beautiful. It's so, and they posed for a good 10 minutes and kind of changed the angles for us, did little different.
I had too much lens.
You have too much lens.
I stitched it. I had
Did
to
you
stitch
stitch
it
it?
together? Yeah.
But it was really, I mean, again, there's 4 of us out there shooting at the same time, shooting the same bears, and you look at the different perspectives of each of our photos or video, they look very different.
Everybody has their own style.
Although I do have a picture of Michael where he's got the brand new camera and the lens and the tripod all set up. And he pulls out his phone. He's got the phone. He's got the fancy cam all set up. But you just got to do a little bit on the phone.
You just got to do that Instagram story.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, it's so bad, right? And I do, a lot of times I miss it because I forget. But yesterday, and that was the other thing, is you have so many opportunities. You do have time to get the good stuff on the good cameras.
And then take a minute when there's a bear sleeping in the bushes and film it with your phone.
Exactly.
Because it's kind of more rugged, look like raw in the moment.
Yep. So the last part is, and what I was going to reference earlier, so we walked that, 3.5, what'd you say, Max, we did yesterday, 3.5 miles, 4 miles?
3.2?
3.2?
I'd say
We were
a
highly
solid
efficient.
5 miles.
Uphill both
with
ways.
our-
I'm a fisherman. I get to round up.
Stretch it out?
Yeah.
Well, and see, with our packs, they weighed in at probably 25 more pounds.
I ate a lot of food after that. I was like, I carried a lot of weight for at least 5 miles. So
So-
I'm eating all my M&Ms and a big dinner.
So we landed at one lake, and I said earlier, I landed at that lake before, and we took off out of that lake. But yesterday, we landed at one lake, and then the pilot picked us up on a completely different lake. So we walked 5 miles. We didn't retrace any of our steps. We walked that 5 miles or 4 miles, 3 miles, whatever
I'm
it was.
messing everyone up.
27 miles.
And then, so what I was going to ask earlier is, if it's a low water year, how do you cross that that bigger river, because I didn't do that last time I was there. And Max got wet.
Just a reminder, quickly pull up your hip boots before you get in the river.
Right. Right. Or at least strap them to your belt, or at least wear a belt.
Well, yeah. So on that river, you go out there and you have indicators where there's a rock that's on that island that once a certain portion of that rock is showing, you're like, okay, I can cross anywhere here. If it reaches another mark, you're like, okay, I got to use this zigzag route from like gravel bar to gravel bar to gravel bar. And if that rock's underwater,
you're floating.
So no, that would be for as unusual as a low event as we had, for it to be uncrossable would be equally as odd on the other end of the spectrum. So it does happen, and that area is so versatile because there are different lakes you can land in. You can do the trips different ways. There are certain lakes that we take off out of where we'll might have to do a shuttle, where to get everybody out, the pilot will take a couple of the people and fly them to a bigger lake, and then come back and get the other people and then fly them up to the bigger lake where you've got more takeoff area. So there are just all these tricks that you get with having an experienced bush pilot, with having a guide who knows water levels and things like that couldn't save us all from from filling the hip boots yesterday. But
well, and I think the cool thing again about that is when you spend the money to go on a trip like this, you're putting money back into a local economy, and that local economy is going to keep working to protect these areas. So yeah, your vacation might cost a bit more, but if you really think in terms of this is supporting people who support this habitat, I think that's a good way to look at it.
That's a perfect way to look at it, and you're going to have a much better adventure.
Yep.
There's all these little pitfalls that you could fall into by yourself that are never, for example, you're not going to fill up your waders with boots, or you're not going to fill up your boots with water, and then that is very well put. I'm glad you said that, because that is probably the most important thing.
And then Homer's got good pizza places. It's a great way to celebrate at the end of the day. You
it's
go
a
out
very good way.
Have some fine Homer dining. Or Kodiak. People go to
Kodiak's another one
as well. So,
all right,
dining in Kodiak.
Let's wrap this up. But the contacting Sullivan is only good for how long?
We're going to do that basically for just the next couple weeks.
Okay,
here.
so it's worth it for the next, because this will go out next week, or next Tuesday, or maybe even earlier. So that is still important. Still, everything we talked about in the last podcast, go to alaskabears.earth, www.alaskabears.earth, and it's so easy. Just fill out the form, just click on the links and follow. Just do what they have laid out to do.
And be persistent. I know this is a long fight, but we're all in it together, right? So let's keep the momentum going, because this is really, it's coming down to the final things.
Well, and I'm fascinated by social media and a little scared of it. But yeah, let's all retweet Donald Trump Jr.'s tweet about Pebble and his sister.
I think that's a great idea. But do you remember the time did you hear when all the fishermen sent corks to Murkowski that said no Pebble mine on it, and we corked her off, which is a fishing phrase? That was one. If you make commercial fishermen angry, like, she just got thousands of corks. So it makes a statement when you start to use a bunch of people to make a voice. It doesn't have to be corks, obviously, but even emailing and calling, your voice makes a difference.
Well, and we should say also on that www.alaskabears.earth, we have our social media guide where, if you've got bear images, like it's a guide that allows you to wage your own campaign. So if you reference the things we're talking, you say, okay, I'm going to direct my followers to email Sullivan, or whatever the latest call to action is, which will be on the website. It's got the list of hashtags. It's got the things you need. And I mean, just because you're not,
doesn't matter your following size, because you might have 300-400 people that we wouldn't have reached. So 300 or 400 voices, that's great. And you don't even have to have bear pictures. Like, draw a bear on your shirt and take a selfie, and
Hashtag share your bears.
Hashtag share your bears.
So you can do that easy stuff, but the other thing to do is follow Drew and Erin on Instagram, because they are all over it as far as what's going on at the moment. You won't be for a while, because
I'm going to be out of service for a little while
on a shoot. But Drew is always on it. So follow Drew. Let's see, AlaskaBears.earth, but also your Instagram handle is Drew
HH.
HH.
And
And then Erin's is E Ranney, right?
Yep. So E.RANNEY.
And this is all linked in the show notes, so you can get to all that stuff. But follow those guys, these two people, because they will get you the information at the moment. Whatever's pertinent that
like
day.
I said, Drew's on my speed dial. As soon as I hear something, I'm like, Drew,
did you hear that?
did you hear this?
Yeah, it's
And I'm sure he has about 20 people that are like that.
all of our content is baked fresh daily. So
And what I do is, rather than using the social media guide, I just go to your Instagram and I just copy all the hashtags right there because that's what you're doing with them anyway.
Yeah,
so
we want to spread the word. Steal our
spread the word.
hashtags.
Exactly.
Steal our captions.
Just
I
make
don't
it
care.
easy.
Just get the word out.
Just make it easy on yourself. So, is there anything fresh hashtags that are new that we need to be throwing around?
Yes, veto Pebble Mine.
Yep.
And because we should say what our ask is right now is, so the Army Corps of Engineers has completed their environmental impact statement, which has disregarded science, good science that has been established over decades. They basically said, no, we're throwing that out. We don't need to look at it. They've really restricted the project, so they're really only looking at a fraction of it. And so now the Environmental Protection Agency can use their 404C powers, under the Clean Water Act, where they can veto this project. And it should be said, this has happened before. The previous administration vetoed this, and it was resurrected in this weird form. And so we need the EPA to use their 404C Clean Water Act authority to veto this project. So Dan Sullivan asked him to hashtag veto Pebble Mine.
And none of you all can ever go use Drew as a guide as long as this fight's going on because he's too busy.
Yeah.
But
So
if this fight's done, then you can hire
do
Drew.
it for Drew.
Yeah. You definitely want Drew when you're out on a bear trip. So the sooner we get this done, the sooner he becomes available.
It has reduced my work hours.
And sleep hours.
And sleep hours, yeah.
And I got to say COVID had a little bit to do with it this
COVID.
year.
Yeah, COVID freed up a lot of time.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
You've been listening to the Wild and Exposed podcast. If you haven't yet, please give us a rating and a review. And make sure you're subscribed so that you'll get every episode we produce as soon as we drop it. And as always, thanks for tuning in.
We're gonna make it someday. Nothing's gonna get in our way. We will be the biggest band in town.